UNM dietetic intern.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about adolescence. So one of the things that I want us to do as we get started is just think a little bit about what makes adolescents different and why we have to think of how we assess their nutritional needs and estimate nutritional needs differently. So some terminology here. Those of you who work in middle schools and high schools already know these things, but we're going to try to talk about them in a little bit of an organized fashion. So I want you to think about how sexual maturity ratings help us estimate nutrient needs in adolescence. Sexual maturity ratings are the new terminology for Tanner staging. So those of you who've been around as long as I have or longer, that's what you learned, but now it's their SMRs. What target nutrient is especially critical in early puberty? And what creative strategies can you share for helping adolescents meet their unique nutritional needs? So that'll be the time for you to be the keeper of the knowledge and to let us know what creative ways you've come up with helping adolescents make good choices. So just reminding you, when we talk about pediatric nutrition, we add a couple of things to the list that we don't necessarily consider in the adult population, and those are the F and G on our ABCs, so feeding skills and development and growth pattern. So those are very, very unique to pediatrics, and they're especially important here in the last part of the alphabet, the G, the growth pattern, because that's really what we're looking at in adolescence. So in adolescence, growth and physical development is more rapid than any other time except infancy. So we've looked at tables in terms of nutrient needs in terms of calories and protein, and we also looked at weight change during the course of pediatrics. And as we look at that, you can tell that if you look at an infant that's gaining anywhere from 20 to 30 grams a day, it drops down into that early elementary age or elementary school age that we talked about before, around 7 and 8 grams a day, and now we're back up to around 12 to 15. So we've come up to a very, very rapid growth phase again. The other thing to keep in mind is in addition to what's happening on the outside that we can see, the other thing that's happening is that the brain is growing very rapidly again at this time. And again, it's more rapid than any other time except in that first year in infancy. So rapid changes in brain growth and brain capacity for decision making. And so when we talk about the cognitive development and how that impacts choices adolescents make, keep in mind that their brain is changing as fast as their body, and sometimes that's really hard for them to manage. It makes it confusing for them as they're trying to negotiate, both changes. And infants can cry and tell us they're unhappy, and we have some ways to deal with that. It gets a little bit more difficult in an adolescent, trying to help them navigate these major changes that we see happening at that time. So the other thing to keep in mind is that dietary and nutrient intake during this time is really important for what we will see in their future health. And one of the things to keep in mind is as we see them grow very rapidly, we tend to think about adolescents getting a lot taller, so that tells us their skeleton's changing. So if we miss the opportunity to build bone density here, then there's that potential for decreased bone density throughout the lifetime. And if you remember from long ago, your life cycle courses, we have up until about age 35 to build bone density. However, we'll talk a little bit about how that occurs and when it occurs during puberty, keeping in mind that if we don't do a lot of it now, we don't get another chance. The other thing is the establishment of lifelong food intake and food behavior patterns. So at home, kids are exposed to what their parents think is the good way or the best way to do things. And those tend to persist even when they go see their friends. At the time that we see kids moving away from the home and spending a lot more time with their friends and in school and maybe work and extracurricular activities, the food intake and food behavior patterns they establish now become very, very important for how they'll make choices in the future. So it's hard to change once you get set in your ways, especially if you're making radical changes at this time in your life. And then there's this potential for overweight and obesity. And unfortunately, when we talk about overweight and obesity in children and adolescents, and we do that in our next clinic because that's what a big problem it is in our current society. This is when we see the manifestations of that. So entering adolescence, if you are overweight or obese, you have about an 85% chance of staying that way for the rest of your life. So certainly we want to catch these kids earlier, but we still have a chance in adolescence related to those things that we're concerned about in adult life. So when we assess nutrition needs in adolescence, again, we're going to include all those parameters that we included in younger children, so the ABCs. However, the thing that's really, really critical in adolescence is puberty. So puberty and its progression through puberty defines the changes that we see in nutrient needs in adolescence, depending on where they are. So there are 3 major stages of puberty in adolescence. One, early adolescence, which is 11 to 14 years. Middle adolescence, which is 15 to 17 years, and late adolescence, which is 18 to 21 years. So any of you who've worked with young adults, especially young men, will know that they keep growing when they go off to college or when they graduate from high school. And we tend to think about this late adolescence and the growth period lasting up to almost age 25. And I can tell you with my own 2 older adult male children that they each grew at least an inch during college, and they were already over 6 feet when they graduated from high school. So, you know, that was shocking if you don't see them for a few months and then they come home. It's like, oh my gosh, you're taller. Yeah, Mom, I need some new pants. My pants are too short. And you thought you were done with that. So that growth is still occurring. Key features of the adolescent growth spurt, which we think about, that are true for both males and females, that affect nutrition assessment are the time of onset. So when do you start seeing that more rapid growth? How long does that last? In other words, does it last a year? Does it last 3 years? Does it last 4 years? And the magnitude in terms of how fast that you see the changes occurring. So here's a schematic of sort of where males and females fit on, you know, in a pattern of sort of cognitive growth and pubertal growth, and then also the psychosocial maturation. So you see we have early, middle, and late adolescence here. And if we think about that in terms of cognitive development and social development, we expect different things of adolescence at those different stages. So early, middle, and late adolescence. So we were talking just a minute ago about late adolescence, so students who are in college or in trade school after high school. They are making different decisions about, you know, how to live their lives at that point, and their growth rate is changing. In middle adolescence, that's typically most kids are in high school at that time. So you can kind of visualize what things are going on there. They're learning a lot. They're really exercising their new cognitive powers, doing very abstract things, higher order math, reading, science, and they're also exploring their sexuality and their relationship to their peers and trying to figure out where they think they want to go in the world. And then early adolescence is the place where we see a lot of this stuff occurring in late elementary school. So for girls in 5th grade, and certainly through middle school. Now, depending on what school district you're in, that could be 6th through 8th grade. It could just be 7th and 8th grade. Some middle schools go from 6th to 9th grade. So there's kind of a mix. But the thing that's interesting is if you walk into a middle school where you see kids between the ages of 12 and 14, the differences between males and females and among a group of females and among a group of males is dramatic. You can see boys who are 5 feet tall and girls who are 5'10". And you can see girls that look like they could be models, and you can see girls that are pretty still gawky looking. So it's kind of a crazy thing from the standpoint of trying to figure out the population, the need for that particular population. But you can imagine those middle school teachers trying to navigate where these kids are in terms of their development. And again, we talked a little bit about cognitive maturation. So during this time, the brain is growing almost, not quite as fast, but as fast as any other time except for infancy, especially the frontal cortex. So this is the place where we learn to make decisions. So adolescents at this point in time do some crazy things. And some of that has to do with the way their brain is changing. So riding their skateboard without a helmet, experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and other kinds of risky behaviors. And some of it's not just because they want to drive their parents nuts. It's because of the way their brain's changing. They don't think about things carefully, about whether or not it's a good choice or not at that moment in time. They're kind of wrapped up. So that executive function and decision-making processes that they mature over the course of this time and well into late adolescence. So you'll see if you look at puberty onset in males and females, it's earlier in females. You can have young girls menstruating as early as 8, and that's still within reason. But if you look at that curve, that would be pretty early. But usually around 10, 10 and a half, you'll start to see girls get taller. You might see them progress into the first stage of puberty. And then with males, it's a little later. So those kids are actually going through that process, starting that process in middle school. So if we look at sexual maturity ratings or Tanner stages, they're 1 through 5 in both males and females. And by stage 5, puberty is complete. Now, it doesn't mean we all get the same attributes at age 5 or at stage 5. Obviously, some women are going to be bigger busted than others. Some men are going to have attributes that other men don't. But certainly, in terms of the pattern of staging, it's going to be the same, and males and females are going to progress from 1 to 5. Stage 1 means nothing's happening, so that's most of your elementary school. But stage 2 is that onset of puberty that we start seeing in girls around 10 and boys around 12. And it's assigned by assessing primary and secondary sexual characteristics. The other thing it's useful for is assessing growth patterns. Growth parameters is the expectations for growth at each stage are different. So as you move into puberty, the most rapid part is sort of in the middle, and I'll show you a graph of that too. And the thing that I really want to stress here is we talked about bone density. 40% of skeletal mass is gained between SMR3 and 4 in males and in SMR2 for females. So young girls around the ages of 10 to 12 are laying down most of their skeletal mass at that point in time, 40% at that time. And it makes sense again when you go into that middle school and you see all those girls who were taller than the boys, because they're about SMR2 at that point. The boys are going to do that basically in high school, where the girls are going to do it earlier. But this is really, really important as we think about nutrient needs for those girls who are developing that skeleton and that calcium phosphorus reserve. So if we look at girls, again, this range 9.5 to 14.5 for that height spurt, but it's going to be basically right in the middle, so you're going to see these kids get really tall about 12 or 13. It's not uncommon for girls to reach their adult height before they leave middle school. So one of the things to keep in mind is that menarche can occur anywhere in that range, and usually we don't get worried about it until a girl hasn't started menstruating until after age 16, and there are all kinds of reasons for that, but usually there's not a concern as long as there's some family history of sort of a later start to things. Sort of a rule of thumb is if a girl has had her period or had onset of menarche for at least a year with regular periods, that she probably is not going to get much growth after that. So about a year and a half out, and that's probably your adult height at that point. Breast development again starts at SMR2, and this is where these girls are that are, around, 10 and a half, 11, 12 is where you're going to see that start to happen. And the same with pubic hair development. If you look at boys, again, starting later, there's a little bit of a start, but right at the, that beginning to middle of high school is when you're going to start to see them shoot up. And again, the girls are taller at that point. They will have some of those other characteristics change. And again, these aren't the things that people notice walking down the street. These are discussions that parents and children have with their providers. So one of the things that's interesting is that if there is some concern about growth in terms of height, because remember we've talked about if kids are growing at the rate we expect in terms of height, we consider that a measure of anabolism. Things must be pretty good if your body thinks it has enough energy reserve and to result in good height growth or good linear growth. So sometimes if you're concerned about that, this might be something you'd share with your pediatrician, and this assessment of where kids are in terms of pubertal growth can be assessed. So again, our focus is on the change in growth parameters. And again, this incremental changes in height are the best marker of anabolism. So if kids are growing, getting taller, and we even talked about this with infants and younger children, if you see their height change the way that you would expect, then for the outsider, it means that most nutrient needs are probably being met. The tricky thing is sort of the extremes of the spectrum, and you can see this again just in our society. We have the low end where we talk about kids spending a lot of time in sedentary activities, and even school activities now require a lot of work on the computer, a lot of reading. As we really focus on academic performance, it means kids are sitting a lot more doing that kind of thing. But then we have the flip side of that, which is the kids who are involved very early in highly competitive sports or elite sports. So you have kids in elementary school who are practicing every day for some specific sport and might be practicing more than an hour a day, up to 2 hours a day. And Beth Goins, our cardiologist, talked a little bit about this in our last session of COMTC, and I alluded to it in the younger population, but that split seems to be even greater in adolescence. So you have kids that are doing very little and kids who are doing a lot. And that place in the middle where we'd like kids to be and adolescents to be, where they've got a little bit of regular activity every day, seems to be lacking. So we have a kind of a funny curve. We have a U-shaped curve. A lot of people on the end where they're not doing much, and some people on the end that are doing a lot. And in the middle it goes down instead of up. So it'd be kind of nice to flatten that out so we could, put everybody, you're doing something instead of nothing. And there are some articles out there that relate sedentary lifestyles with poor food choices. I give you a reference here to look at, but that's not the whole story. The other thing to keep in mind with this population is, again, this is the place where adolescents are trying to figure out where they fit in. Who am I? Who are my friends? What am I supposed to look like? How do I put health and my self-image into my identity? And so you see the other side of this, which is one of the ways that I can change my outward appearance is by what I eat or what I don't eat. So sometimes you see self-restriction of food or energy, or even a change in the kinds of food. We're going to spend a little time with the idea of being vegan or vegetarian at this time, but we're going to cut out red meat, or we're not going to drink milk anymore because milk is just for little kids. So you'll see sort of a variety of things happening, but you also in those athletes that are in highly competitive sports where body size is very important, this is where they get introduced to the idea of self-restriction to decrease energy consumption so that they maintain a smaller body. Gymnastics, wrestling, elite distance runners, this is where you start seeing some of that. And what's interesting, I remember from my high school years, friends of mine that were athletes with me that played football in the fall, wrestled in the winter, and then ran track with us in the springtime. The males would have a dramatic change in their size between the fall and the winter and the spring. So they'd be kind of bulked up, not fat, but certainly eating well during the fall, and their pants would be hanging off of them by the time they got to Christmas break because they'd been starving themselves to participate at a lower weight. And if we think about the fact that we're building bone density at this time, we're setting the stage for lifetime eating behaviors, that's a very concerning trend. So our target nutrients in adolescence, the macronutrients, we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's a table that we have on the following slide. But again, the growth assessment that we've talked about in previous sessions and the medical history will determine what we expect in terms of growth, and therefore what we're concerned about with macronutrients. Also the stage of puberty. So if you're in that really rapid growth spurt, obviously you're going to need a little bit more of everything at that point, and energy being one of those things. In terms of micronutrients, one of the big concerns is calcium, because again, we're talking about establishing 40% of our skeletal mass during, sometime between 2 and 4, SMR 2 and 4, was just right in this period. So if this is a time when you've decided you're not going to drink milk, or you become intolerant to milk, and it's an important source of calcium and maybe vitamin A and vitamin D in your diet, we have to get real creative about how to meet these needs. The other thing is, as kids experiment with eating in fast food restaurants, because those are great places for teens to hang out, they may not be eating as many good sources of fruits and vegetables that contain vitamin C, vitamin A, and folic acid. So again, maybe creative ways of working that in. And then the other thing is iron. So for, red meat is got a bad name in some people's books. Certainly for male athletes that get some, sort of positive strokes for being big and strong and muscular, they may not be reducing their intake of red meat at this point, or good sources of iron, but young women might be. And of course, they're menstruating now, so they're losing iron every single month, and there's no place to replace that, no way to replace that unless you can consume it in your diet or you take it in some kind of a supplement form. And then zinc is also one of those things that kind of goes along with iron in the food supply. So if you are restricting good sources of iron in your diet, primarily meat products, then you're also reducing your intake of zinc, which is very important for progress through sexual maturity. So if you are zinc deficient, you don't progress through puberty like you're supposed to. And there are some rare kinds of syndromes out there where that may be an issue. But we certainly don't want it to be an issue just because we've decided to cut zinc out of our food choices. And then vitamin D, again, we're concerned about skeletal growth at this point. In New Mexico, if kids are outside and they have some skin exposed, this may be less of an issue. But if you're in some places where you have a long winter, or covering up is part of what's expected of adolescents, then vitamin D can be a major problem if you don't have it in your food supply. So one of the best ways to look at estimating nutrient needs in adolescents is, again, looking at changes in linear growth, because you can't just say, oh, all 12-year-olds need X number of calories per kilo. We have some kind of global ways of looking at that in younger children, but really when we start seeing such rapid changes and differences between, if we look at this chart, just 11 to 14-year-old males, we could have a 14-year-old male who's 6 feet tall and one who's just starting puberty, because that's just the way it is in their family, who's 5 feet tall. So one of the best ways to look at energy estimates is just on calories per centimeter. And the same with protein needs. You have a range there, but I think this is a good way to look at it. And you'll see that this chart goes all the way up to age 24, because we talked about early that young men especially may be growing still through the time that they're in college or post-secondary education. All right, so we have a little case for you all to practice, and so I've attached the growth chart so you can look at these also. This is a 14-year-old male who's 159 centimeters and weighs 129 pounds. So what I'd like you to do with your growth charts that were included in your handouts is calculate the BMI, and then plot the growth parameters on the chart, determine the BMI percentile, and then we're going to talk about what you found. But in the meantime, there were a few people who signed on, so let's go ahead while people are doing their calculations, and let's check in with those who've just signed on to our session.
Hi, this is Margie Bludnick with WIC.
Morning.
Good morning. This is Eileen.
Try again.
Good morning. This is Eileen Miller, and I'm a diabetes educator in Red Lake, Minnesota.
Good morning, Eileen.
Morning.
Good morning. My name is Laura Clement. I'm a school nurse in Truth or Consequences.
Welcome.
Has anybody else joined us who has not stated their name? It sounds like somebody may have just jumped on. If you could just go ahead and state your name so we can write you down.
Yes, I did. My name's Gil Alvarado. I had a surprise patient this morning, so I couldn't get the beginning of it, but I'm getting in there now if I can.
Welcome, Gil.
Thank you.
All right, so you've all had time to do your math. And Lauren, the dietetic intern who's spending 6 weeks with us here at Envision, has all the answers.
So if you look at the body mass index for age percentile, I got that the BMI was just about 23.2. So it's going to put him between the 85th and 90th percentile. And then if you go ahead and you look at the weight for age, so he's 14 years old and he's 129 pounds. So it's going to put him in between the 50th and 75th, real close to the 75th percentile. And for his stature, he's the 10 to 25th, really close to that 25th percentile line.
So what was the BMI again?
The BMI I got was about 23.2, so it's going to put him to the 85th, 90th percentile.
Okay. How does that compare with what other people got?
I got the same.
That's good. It's nice when people's math is...
I was never saying that I was answering.
All right, so now that you've done that, let's talk a little bit about what else we know about this young man. So from the standpoint of, we're going through our ABCs here. We did the anthropometric piece. So if we look at his biochemical profile here, total cholesterol 155, HDL 25, triglyceride 111, and his fasting blood glucose is 91. In terms of a clinical exam, he has mild acanthosis nigricans. He has a maternal grandmother who has a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, and he has a sister with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And looking at his dietary patterns, he likes traditional northern New Mexico food. However, his food is cooked and eaten at home with his family and takes his lunch to school, his leftovers from dinner. In terms of environment, he likes football and he made the freshman team. He's concerned that he's too small. And this has some relationship to his experience on the football team. So any questions about what we've got here in terms of our biochemical, clinical, dietary, and environmental parameters here? What do the labs say to you all? Gil, I'm going to put you on the spot there in Ruidoso. What do these labs say to you?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay.
So that you get to interpret this young man's lab. So he's 14 years old. You heard where his BMI was. But his labs, total cholesterol 155, HDL 25, his triglycerides are 111, and he had a fasting blood glucose of 91. So, any comments?
Well, we probably need to improve his HDL, and since he is playing football or on the freshman team, he's probably going to be exercising somewhat, which would help increase the HDL. How old is he again? 14?
14. Mm-hmm.
14. What was his BMI? I missed that, I think.
It's about 23.2.
Which puts him percentile-wise?
He's going to be
Wow,
between the 85th and 90th.
He's got a healthy BMI.
So he's between the 85th and 90th percentile for his age, BMI?
Is that correct? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's not too bad. I mean, that's pretty good. His total cholesterol isn't bad. I think the only thing that would bother me is to get increases HDL and to decrease his triglyceride level. And I'm not sure if that would warrant putting him on medication or not, to be honest with you, since he's so young.
Yeah, probably not. But, I think it's important, though, to have your input that you're already sort of thinking because, in this clinical background, that he has a family history of insulin resistance with a sister with PCOS and a maternal grandmother with type 2 diabetes. So, I think having that in the back of your mind is really important as we go through.
Right.
And yeah, his HDL is really low. It's kind of surprising, if he's on the football team. So maybe there's something we can do. So, how would you approach
they
this?
said that exercising regularly and reaching your aerobic target. I'm not sure what it would be for him without looking it up right now, but that should help bring his HDL up. And if he really is conscientious of his diet, right? Well, northern New Mexico diet is is filled with a lot of cheese and chili. I could do the chili, and of course, you got carnitas, and you got all this other stuff, right? That could possibly increase his cholesterol or his triglycerides somewhat. The sugars and things like that would probably increase his triglycerides. So I would think it would be prudent to caution him of diet choices, which would possibly help reverse some of those two numbers that are kind of bad. What's your thought?
All right, so lucky for you, Gil, there are about 5 or 6 dietitians participating this morning. And so they have all the answers. Actually, they have a lot of experience probably working with a case just like this. So, how would you collectively, Gil's a provider who's got this kid coming into clinic in his school. He's concerned about the labs. You guys are a team. How would you approach this case? And in addition, what more would you like to know about this young man?
Probably other numbers regarding his family. What kind of cholesterol numbers do his immediate family members have? And if they're very similar, then it's probably very much genetic, and there's probably not a whole lot that you can do except possibly maybe trickle in a little bit of medication. I don't know. That's my thought.
Okay. How about the dietitians in the group? Remembering what we talked about today. He's 14, so we don't have any other pieces of sort of where he is in puberty. And so, Gil, we would be going back to you to say, this kid's concerned, but can you tell us where he is in his pubertal growth spurt, his pubertal pattern, so we kind of have an idea of what our targets are?
I see.
That's what I'd like to know.
Oh, okay.
So I'd like to know where he is.
That's probably something I would check into. Yeah. So, well, I don't have any answers. To be honest with you, I would say that if he was 14, and if he was somewhat normal 14, he would probably have a normal puberty level with the hair growth and where it's supposed to be and everything else. So that's my thought.
So if we go back, go ahead, Kirsten. I'm going to find our slide here while you're...
Well, if you didn't have, for example, his Tanner stage, you could at least start with parents' height to get some sort of genetic height potential and an idea for is 25th percentile, where he's probably going to stay.
Right.
And that way you can kind of start educating him about weight maintenance. I would probably want to know what his activity level was before he started, because a lot of kids don't start sports until they're in high school, and they have really no activity prior to that. Family activity and diet patterns would be interesting.
So what kind of message do you think that this young man's getting from his peers on the football team and potentially his coach? That maybe gives us some idea about his comment that he doesn't think he's concerned that he's too small.
Too small. Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, if you can figure out how tall his parents are, and then you take a growth chart and explain to him, you know, if his parents are short, he's probably going to be short. So his best kind of goal for being like a really good member of the team is going to be to kind of be fast or whatever, because he might not get as tall as the other kids, you know, and he might not understand that.
So maybe the front line's not for him.
Well, I'm just saying, like, you know, he has to have a realistic idea of his height potential in the first place. So.
Yeah, is he below average height right now? I mean, I kind of missed quite a bit of all this information, but is he below average height?
He's at the 10 to 25th percentile for his height, really close to the 25th percentile line.
Huh.
You know, so one of the things might be that he's early in that growth spurt and he really hasn't started yet. You know, his dad might be 5'10" or, 5'11", but he's just started, so he's not, he's not quite there yet. So I think Kirsten's point of, trying to figure out where he is in puberty so that we can give him some support in terms as he waits for his body to catch up with where he wants to be. And also, potentially supporting his choices to eat what his family is cooking. I mean, that's great that he's eating most of his food at home. So it means that he has a really great relationship with his family, probably, and that there might be some places to work there if we're concerned about intake. Could also be that, what they're cooking and eating at home is fantastic. They may be eating lots of beans and rice and homemade things from their garden, and so it may be that we are just waiting to see what happens. But I think Gil's point is well taken, that he has a history that makes us concerned, and the fact that he's already got acanthosis nigricans means that he already has some insulin resistance. So I think we have to take that pretty seriously at this point as we work with him. So I'm not taking up more than my half hour, which I already have. Those dietitians and nutrition providers in the group, I'm going to make you think about what would be some potential diagnoses here based on what you know nutritionally at this point. And let's make it easy for ourselves.
Dyslipidemia for sure.
Say again?
He has dyslipidemia for sure.
Okay. Okay, so the nutrition providers in the group, if you were to look at your nutrition diagnostic terminology, so basically Gil's using an ICD-9 diagnosis of dyslipidemia. What would be potential coordinating nutrition diagnosis at this point?
Well, I'd want to talk to him, kind of like you said about, so the northern New Mexico food diet. I'd want to know if he's having an excessive fat intake then to work with that dyslipidemia diagnosis.
Okay. What else
Yeah,
could we
I mean,
take a stab at?
If this is the only information I have, because I basically don't have really much of a diet history, you could do the alter, nutrition-related lab values, PES, and start there.
Mm-hmm. The rest of our audience?
I mean, he's considered overweight. You could use that one.
Standards also.
Would getting a dietary, what do they call those things? Diary. Would that be helpful? Asking him to do that.
Go ahead, Kirsten. You're nodding your head.
Yes, that is always helpful. If they'll do it, it really kind of helps the kids think about what they're eating, but it gives you a lot more insight, and you don't have to depend on their memory as much. So that'd be an excellent idea.
Yeah.
And if Carol was here, our motivational interviewing resident expert, she would probably channel us to talking to this child in a way that supports the activity that he's doing, the fact that he likes football, and using that as sort of a way to help him engage in making good choices that will change his athletic performance. Because it sounds like that's what he's concerned about. So a lot of times if we talk about, okay, you feel like you're too small, how's the football going, tell me a little bit more about that, you might get a place to work, and that he's very concerned about his growth, his height, his strength, his speed. And then we can use those dietary interventions and lifestyle interventions to impact his athletic performance, which should get us where we want to go with his labs too.
So if he wasn't going to grow anymore, and he really wants to play football through his high school time, would it be prudent to maybe refer him to maybe a sports doc to possibly have some growth hormone injected into him?
Probably not. Seeing as that I don't have a medical degree, I am a dietitian.
Yeah. Right.
If he's supposed to be that 25th percentile, I mean, 25th percentile is certainly within the realm of acceptable if that's where his family growth pattern is. Now, if we're concerned that he's supposed to be 6'5", and everybody else in his family is 6'5", and he's had a change in his growth pattern that makes us believe that he's not along a trajectory that we would expect, then certainly I would make a referral to endo and make sure that he's okay. However, at the 25th percentile, if we go back, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, Gil, when we assess growth in children, one of the unfortunate things is if you only see them one time, or you're seeing them a single time and you've never seen them before, you know, 1 point just gives you where they are in that moment. It doesn't tell you about where they've been and where they're going. So if this were my patient, I'd address their concerns, but I'd also include some follow-up so that I can kind of see where they're headed. The other thing is I would want to get a hold of his growth records from when he was younger to see if I could create that trend. So I got an idea of where he was growing when he was younger, where he was headed. And that would make me feel more comfortable. But being at the 25th percentile is really not concerning. Somebody has to be at the 25th percentile.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, so this is Kirsten Watts with the UNM Pediatric Nephrology, and we have to put a lot of our kids on growth hormone, and it is extremely hard to get it covered. You have to prove that there's a medical reason, a necessity for it, that they're not growing. So, for example, if I'm just going to be short, I'm kind of stuck with just being short, but if I'm not growing because of my mineral bone disease from chronic kidney disease, then we get it covered. And even then, it takes many, many weeks of us going through that prior authorization, plotting growth velocities, proving that they're not growing before insurance covers it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's hard. It's hard for me to distinguish, you know, are they not growing from their disease? Are they not growing from malnutrition? And it's part of my role is to help the docs kind of determine when we should initiate growth hormone and, you know, to prove that it's a medical reason.
Well, you could definitely rule out the nutrition part as long as they have a good diary that they're submitting to you on a regular basis, right?
Well, not with the little CKD kids, but yeah, in this kid's case, it would probably be easy.
Yeah, we tried not to make this case too difficult. We didn't give him any chronic disease to start with. But if he did have a chronic disease to start with, like chronic kidney disease or some other thing where we're concerned that utilization of consumed nutrients are going to be different, then that complicates the picture. In this case, we're assuming that whatever he eats, he can use in a way that we would expect. So again, that's one of the things we'd want to know more about. But this isn't an uncommon kind of presentation for a nutrition provider to get. They get a referral, they have a little bit of information, and sometimes we have to have more. And so the point that I wanted everyone to kind of get out of the discussion today was, this is a child who's probably early in puberty. That's a piece that we're missing from this case. And that's something that I'd certainly want to get from this child's primary healthcare provider. And if this child was being seen in a school-based health center, obviously we'd have access to this kid a lot more. So we could actually track his growth over the course of the time that he's in school. And we would also have maybe a greater opportunity to make some changes if he's working within the context of training for his sport, which is football, because there'll be other kids that are also interested in the same information. So it might be an opportunity to work with them together as a group, and use that as a way to potentially reduce his risk for developing some of the chronic diseases that have shown up in his family related to insulin resistance. So questions, comments, informal cases?
I do have a question from one of our participants. For the physician's nutritionists, as a school nurse related to this case study, if the student came to the nurse's office first, where would the best first referral be made, to a nutritionist or his primary physician, ignoring insurance and payment issues?
We do that a lot in New Mexico, ignore payment and insurance issues. We're good at that.
So where would the best first referral be made, nutritionist or primary?
So the school nurse did the assessment? Is that the way the question is set up? So
Correct,
the school nurse had this assessment. So the cool thing is that if this nurse happens to be in a school with a school-based health center, then I would refer the child to the school-based health center, because then we'd get primary care right there, and then we'd have access to all the services at this point. Though we would like to ignore insurance and payment options, there is this little funny thing that happens with dietitians, is that if we want to get paid for taking care of patients, they have to see their primary physician first. So in other words, if Gil were the primary seeing this patient and he sent us this child with an ICD-9 diagnosis of dyslipidemia, that allows us to take care of this child, even if our nutrition diagnoses are different. But it allows that path for us to go down that path in working with this child and with this family. So I would say in this case, referring to primary care first would be a good place to start, so that the dietitian referral then comes out of the medical diagnostic path. What would you say, Kirsten Watts?
Yeah, I would agree. Start with the primary, and if you're concerned, and as the nurse, the school nurse, you can write in your correspondence to the PCP, I would recommend a nutrition referral, so that they kind of don't just stop there if they decide not to.
Did that answer your question? Okay.
Sorry. Thank you for answering my question. Would it be prudent to when I make the referral, possibly give the student a 24-hour food diary or a week food diary as an assignment before they go to this appointment?
I think that's great. Any way we can work together? Realizing that a week's hard for most people.
Right.
And if you could even have it so that if you're not sure exactly when the appointment's going to happen, have them do it like the 3 days before they go to their primary appointment. That way it's very recent. So when they're talking with their primary care provider, it's, basically present tense.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I think the nice thing about being a school nurse, you can call them out of class. So even if you feel like they'd be unfaithful in doing it at home, you could even call them out and just have them recall each day for 3 days before the appointment, so that you could have a little bit more accuracy or consistency in the reporting.
Right.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Yay, school nurses. Most of us don't have access
Yay,
to you
right?
guys all the time.
Who knew?
Yeah.
I never went to the school nurse, but, who knew?
Who knew? Now you've got a lot of audience here. I bet the school nurses around the country are all of a sudden going to get calls to have diet histories done, and it's all your fault.
Well, then we'll be calling you for sure, at least here in Albuquerque. So we'll be like, hey, do you have any of those diaries for us to hand out?
And actually, if you would like some of those, we'll put those up on our website. We actually have one. Carol Conley just walked in the room. And we actually have one that we developed for our teen lifestyle change program. So we could put that on our website under the tools and resources. So if you want to go download it, we can do that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's really helpful for us when a kid comes already with that diet history.
Sure. Because, if they're at the appointment and they're trying to recall, we already talked about their cognitive development, so I know most of them can't remember, past a day or two what they ate or whatever. I can't sometimes, so.
Okay.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything else? Questions or comments?
I just wanted to make a comment on the diary thing again. I think the way you present it to the child as them partnering up with you or with us, to help him take care of his problem. Motivate him so that he's a part of the resolve. You know what I mean? And I think it may be more accurate and it might be even a little bit more fun for them. You know what I mean? If they know that they're doing something to help themselves too.
In that light, just thinking about it, some of the kids we work with here, with our athletics and stuff, talking about improving their ability, this kid's ability to be a better participant on his team. Maybe sideline it with, write down what you ate, and then, also write down what activities or strengthening activities or, exercises you did, just so that they feel like it is a part of the idea of it's going to make me a better athlete. So
Right. That's a good point.
Hi, this is Monica from Indian Health Service. I'm just thinking about ways to record what he's eating. Perhaps if he has a cell phone, he can maybe take a picture of what his food intake was or what he's going to eat, maybe text it to himself what he ate, just so that we can try and get a better record of what this individual's eating.
And the nice thing about cell phones now too is there's a bunch of food apps that you can easily record what you eat. They tell you even specific. If you go to a fast food restaurant, you can put in, I had a kid's meal or whatever it is. All the food apps are really great for that too. And a lot of them can include your exercise and water intake.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, that's all I have for you guys this morning. I appreciate your participation. I hope this was helpful. And what we're going to be talking about at PNT in 2 weeks is there were some new recommendations that came out in the Journal of Pediatrics around nutrition management of type 2 diabetes, and it's in conjunction with the medical management of newly diagnosed and currently diagnosed children with diabetes. So Clancy, our coordinator for telehealth, did a really nice job summarizing that in her invitation to you all. So hopefully you'll take a look at that. And I think the point there is that we'll talk about the nutrition management, and then it'll be followed up by our endocrinologist in April, talking about the medical management of that group. So hopefully with those two pieces together, it'll start to make a little more sense. And it might even add something to, if you're thinking about the case we talked about today, and the concern for this child's family history of insulin resistance. So hope to see you guys in a couple of weeks. And if you're interested, we'll be talking about depression and anxiety in overweight children at ComTC at noon today, which is one of those sort of comorbid conditions that occurs. Our staff adolescent psychiatrist will be here with us. So see you guys in 2 weeks, if not sooner.
Awesome.